The bridge of the human Space Force ship Valiant was quiet, except for the soft beeping of computers and the low hum of engines. Captain Jake Morrison sat in his command chair, watching the stars drift by on the main screen. 3 years of patrol duty in this part of space had been mostly boring. They checked on trading routes, made sure nobody was breaking laws, and answered the occasional call for help, with broken ships or minor emergencies. Nothing exciting ever happened out here. Lieutenant Claire Hughes sat at her station, monitoring communications from across the sector. She was good at her job, which meant she noticed things others might miss. When a strange signal appeared on her screen, she leaned forward and frowned. The signal was weak and breaking up, but something about it made her stomach tighten with worry. "Captain Morrison," she called out, "I am picking up something strange. It looks like a distress signal, but it is coming from Vela Prime." Morrison turned his chair toward her. Vela Prime was home to the Velans, a peaceful species that mostly kept to themselves. They were scholars and artists, not fighters. They had never sent a distress signal before. "Can you clean up the signal?" Hughes asked Morrison. She worked her controls for a moment, and the crackling voice became clearer. What they heard made everyone on the bridge go silent. The voice belonged to a Velan elder, and he sounded terrified. "Please, anyone who can hear this, we need help. The Kryn have invaded our world. They came without warning. Our defenses could not stop them. Millions are already dead. They are taking our people as slaves. Please, if anyone can hear this, we are begging for help." The transmission cut off with the sound of explosions and screaming. Morrison felt anger rising in his chest. The Kryn Empire had a reputation throughout the galaxy. They were conquerors who took what they wanted and crushed anyone who stood in their way. They had been expanding for decades, and the Galactic Council always seemed too scared or too slow to stop them. Morrison stood up and called his senior officers to the briefing room. Lieutenant Commander Kyle Harris arrived first. He was the tactical officer, a veteran who had fought in the Mars Rebellion years ago. He had seen real combat and knew what war looked like. Sergeant Nicole Baker came next, leading the ship's Marine detachment. She was shorter than most of the male soldiers, but twice as tough, and 3 times as skilled with a rifle. Finally, Dr. Andrew Peterson joined them. He was the chief medical officer, a kind man who could fix almost any injury. Hughes played the distress signal again in the briefing room. When it ended, everyone sat in silence for a moment. Harris was the first to speak. "The Kryn have 12 warships in orbit around Vela Prime, according to our sensors. They also have at least 2,000 ground troops on the planet. We are one ship with a crew of 52. Morrison nodded. He knew the numbers looked impossible. "The Velans do not have a military," Peterson said quietly. "They trusted that the Galactic Council would protect them. The Council let them down." Baker leaned forward. "Captain, those people down there are dying. Someone asked for help. We are the only ones close enough to answer." Morrison looked at each of his officers. He saw determination in their eyes, not fear. The truth was, humans were different from most species in the galaxy. Earth was not a gentle world. It had hurricanes that could level cities, earthquakes that split the ground open, and volcanoes that blocked out the sun. It had predators with claws and teeth, diseases that killed millions, and weather that could freeze or cook a person in hours. Every human alive was descended from ancestors who had survived all of that. Other species came from easier worlds. They had evolved on planets with mild weather and few dangers. When they looked at Earth, they called it a death world. They could not understand how humans had not only survived but thrived on such a hostile planet. That survival had made humans tougher, faster to heal, and better at fighting than most aliens could imagine. But more than that, it had taught humans something important. Life was hard, and sometimes the universe was cruel. That meant people had to look out for each other. When someone was in trouble, you helped them. It was that simple. Morrison had grown up on Earth in a small town where everyone knew that rule. He was not about to forget it now. "All right," Morrison said. "Here is what we are going to do. Harris, I want you to analyze the Kryn fleet. Find their weaknesses. Baker, get your Marines ready for a surface deployment. We are going to hit them hard and fast."
Peterson set up a field hospital.
"We will have wounded to treat, both ours and theirs." Everyone looked surprised at that last part. "Sir?" Harris asked. "Are you saying we will treat Kryn wounded?" Morrison nodded. "We are not monsters. We fight when we have to, but we do not let people die when we can save them." The officers left to prepare, and Morrison returned to the bridge. Hughes had already set a course for Vela Prime. The ship's engines powered up and they jumped into quantum drive. The journey would take 36 hours. Morrison knew that every hour they delayed meant more Velans would die. But rushing in without a plan would only get his crew killed. He sent a message back to Earth Command letting them know what was happening. Reinforcements would take weeks to arrive. By then it would be too late. The Valiant and her crew would have to handle this alone. Morrison was not worried about his crew. They were professionals, every one of them. They had trained for situations like this even if nobody really expected them to happen. What did worry Morrison was what came after. If they succeeded, if they actually managed to drive off the Kryn, it would change things. The galaxy would see that humans were not just tough survivors. They were warriors when they needed to be. Some species would respect that. Others would fear it. A few might even hate humanity for it. But Morrison believed that doing the right thing mattered more than being liked. During the journey, Morrison walked through the ship talking to his crew. They were checking weapons, running system diagnostics, and preparing drop pods. Everyone knew the odds were bad, but nobody complained. A young ensign named Kevin Brooks stopped Morrison in the corridor. "Sir," he said nervously, "do you really think we can win?" Morrison put a hand on the young man's shoulder. "Brooks," he said, "we come from a planet that has tried to kill us for millions of years. It failed. These Kryn picked the wrong species to mess with." Brooks smiled a little at that. Morrison continued walking. He found Baker in the armory with her Marines. They were loading magazines and checking armor seals. Baker looked up when Morrison entered. "We are ready, Captain," she said. "Good," Morrison replied. "Remember, our job is to protect the Velans, not to be heroes. Get in, complete the mission, and get out alive." Baker nodded. Her squad would be going down to the planet while Morrison and Harris handled the space battle. It was the most dangerous job, but Baker had volunteered without hesitation. As the hours passed, the crew grew quiet. This was normal before combat. People dealt with fear in different ways. Some joked and laughed. Others got very serious and focused. A few wrote messages to family back on Earth just in case. Morrison understood. He had written his own message, sealed it, and given it to Hughes with instructions to send it if he did not make it back. Finally, the Valiant dropped out of quantum drive at the edge of the Vela system. Immediately, the sensors lit up with contacts. 12 Kryn warships hung in orbit around the planet like vultures waiting for something to die. Morrison looked at the display and felt his jaw tighten. Those ships had been bombing cities and killing innocent people. That was about to end. "Hughes," he said, "open a channel to the Kryn fleet. Let them know we are here. Time to announce that the Deathworlders had arrived." The Kryn warships detected the Valiant immediately. Morrison watched his display as the enemy fleet began to move, repositioning to get a better look at the newcomer. The Kryn ships were large and painted dark red like dried blood. Each one was 3 times bigger than the Valiant. Their weapons bristled from every surface, designed to overwhelm and destroy anyone foolish enough to oppose them. Harris ran his analysis quickly. "Captain," he said, "their shields are weaker than ours, but they have more firepower. If they all focus on us at once, we will not last long." Morrison nodded. He had expected that. The trick would be to not let them surround the Valiant. Keep moving, stay unpredictable, and hit them before they could coordinate their attacks. A communication request came through. Hughes looked at Morrison, who nodded. She opened the channel. The face that appeared on the main screen made several crew members flinch. Commander Vex of the Kryn Empire looked like something from a nightmare. His skin was covered in dark red scales, and his eyes were yellow with black slits for pupils. When he spoke, his voice came out as a harsh hiss that the translator turned into cold, clipped words. "Human vessel," Vex said. "You have entered a Kryn military zone. Explain your presence or be destroyed." Morrison kept his face calm. "Commander Vex, I am Captain Jake Morrison of the Human Space Force. Vela Prime is under the protection of the Galactic Council. Your invasion violates Council law. Withdraw your forces immediately." Vex laughed, a sound like breaking glass. "The Council is weak," he said. "The Valans have no military and no real allies. They are prey and the Kryn are predators. This is the natural order. As for humans, we have studied your species. You fight among yourselves constantly. You are divided and emotional. You cannot stand against the might of the Kryn Empire." Morrison felt a cold smile cross his face. "Commander, you have misunderstood what you saw. Humans fight each other because we are strong enough to survive it. We come from a world that has tried to kill us since the day we climbed down from the trees. Everything on Earth is either trying to eat us, poison us, or crush us. We learned to fight because we had no choice, and now you have given us a reason to show you what that means." Vex's eyes narrowed. "Brave words from a captain with one small ship. I give you 1 hour to leave this system, human. If you are still here when that hour ends, my fleet will turn your ship into debris." The screen went dark. Morrison turned to his crew. "Red alert," he said calmly. "All hands to battle stations. Harris, prepare all weapons. Hughes, send the drop pods down as soon as we engage. Baker, get your people ready." The ship transformed around them. Lights shifted to red. Blast doors sealed. Crew members strapped into their stations. Baker and her Marines climbed into the drop pods, which were essentially armored coffins with thrusters attached. The pods would protect them during the violent descent through the atmosphere, but the ride would be rough. Baker had done it dozens of times in training, but this would be her first real combat drop. Morrison checked the time. 58 minutes had passed. He was not going to wait for the Kryn to make the first move. "Helm, take us in." Full speed. "Harris, target the nearest destroyer. Fire when ready." The Valiant surged forward, accelerating at speeds that would have crushed most alien species. Human ships were built to handle extreme forces because humans had evolved to withstand them. Crew members grunted under the pressure but stayed focused on their jobs. The Kryn were caught off guard. They had expected the human ship to run or maybe try to negotiate. They did not expect a direct attack. Harris fired the railguns, accelerating metal slugs to incredible speeds. The projectiles hit the Kryn destroyer's shields, which flickered and failed. Human weapons relied on kinetic energy, not lasers or plasma. The Kryn shields were designed for the wrong kind of attack. The metal slugs punched through the destroyer's hull. Atmosphere vented into space in white plumes. The ship began to list, its engines sputtering. Morrison did not slow down. He guided the Valiant through the Kryn formation like a shark, cutting through a school of fish. The enemy ships tried to turn and track him, but he was moving too fast and changing direction too quickly. Missiles launched from the Kryn cruisers, dozens of them streaking toward the Valiant. Hughes activated the point defense systems. Automated guns tracked and destroyed most of the missiles. The few that got through hit the shields, draining them but not breaking through. Harris returned fire with the Valiant's own missiles, targeting engines and weapon systems. Another Kryn ship began to drift, crippled. "Launch drop pods," Morrison ordered. Hughes hit the release. 5 pods shot out from the Valiant's underbelly, falling toward Vela Prime. Baker felt a sudden lurch as her pod accelerated. Through the small viewport, she could see the planet growing larger, its blue and green surface scarred by black smoke from burning cities. Her pod shook violently as it hit the atmosphere. The heat was incredible. The pod's exterior glowed white-hot as friction tore at it. Baker's suit kept her cool, but she could feel the vibration in her bones. Around her, the other 4 pods stayed in formation. Private Sam Wright was in one, his sniper rifle secured beside him. Corporal Lisa Grant was in another with her demolition gear. Lance Corporal Ryan Mitchell had his heavy plasma gun. The last pod held Private Dana Cole, their medic and communications specialist. Baker checked her tactical display. They were aiming for the outskirts of the Valen capital city, where Kryn forces had set up a command post. The plan was simple. Hit the command post, free any prisoners, and cause as much chaos as possible. If they could knock out Kryn communications, it would make the enemy fleet easier to fight. Of course, there were probably hundreds of Kryn soldiers at that command post. Baker's squad numbered 5. The odds were terrible, but that had never stopped humans before. Back in space, Morrison threw the Valiant into a spinning dive that brought them under the Kryn formation. Harris fired straight up, hitting the belly of a cruiser where its armor was thinnest. The explosion was spectacular, lighting up space like a small sun. Debris scattered in all directions. The other Kryn ships were finally starting to coordinate, moving to box in the human vessel. Vex's voice came over the communication channel again, no longer calm and superior. "Stop running and fight, human coward." Morrison smiled grimly. He was not running. He was hunting. Every move he made was calculated to position the Valiant for maximum advantage. He led the Kryn ships toward the planet's moon, a large rocky body with a strong magnetic field. The Kryn followed, eager for the kill. They did not notice the radiation readings increasing until it was too late. The moon passed through Vela Prime's radiation belt twice during its orbit, and it was entering that belt now. Morrison had timed it perfectly. The Valiant's shields and hull were designed to handle radiation. They regularly trained near Earth's Van Allen belts, which were similar. The Kryn ships had no such protection. Warning lights blazed on every Kryn bridge as radiation flooded their systems. Shields failed. Sensors scrambled. Crew members began to sicken from exposure. Morrison emerged from the belt behind them, his weapons ready. Harris did not miss. 3 Kryn ships tumbled out of control, their navigation systems fried. A fourth took direct hits to its bridge and went dark. On the surface, Baker's pod slammed into the ground with bone-jarring force. The sides blew open and she rolled out with her rifle up. The other pods landed around her in a loose circle. The Marines moved immediately, taking cover behind rubble and scanning for threats. They had landed exactly where they wanted, 200 meters from the Kryn command post. The building was a converted Velan civic center, its beautiful architecture now scarred by weapons fire and crude Kryn modifications. Guard towers had been erected at the corners. Patrols moved in groups of 4. Baker counted at least 20 soldiers visible, which meant there were probably 3 times that many inside. She signaled her squad to move forward. They had work to do. Baker moved through the ruined streets with her squad spread out behind her. The city had been beautiful once. She could see that in the elegant curves of the buildings and the careful way the streets had been laid out. Now it was a war zone. Walls were pockmarked with bullet holes. Some buildings had collapsed entirely. Bodies lay in the streets, both Velan and Kryn. The sight made Baker's jaw tighten. This was why they were here. Wright climbed to the top of a partially destroyed building, finding a position with a clear view of the command post. He set up his sniper rifle carefully, adjusting for wind and distance. Through his scope, he could see Kryn soldiers moving around the compound. They looked confident, relaxed even. They had won this battle easily and did not expect any real resistance. That overconfidence would cost them. Grant worked on the breaching charges while Mitchell covered her. The Kryn had reinforced the main entrance with metal plates, but Grant was an expert at finding weak points. She placed her explosives at the hinges and locks, using just enough to blow the door without bringing down the whole wall. Too much explosion would alert everyone inside before they could get in. Cole monitored radio frequencies, listening to Kryn communications and ready to jam them when the attack started. Baker checked her watch. In space, Morrison and Harris were keeping the Kryn fleet busy. Down here, it was time to make some noise. She gave the signal. Wright's rifle cracked once, a sound that echoed off the broken buildings. In his guard tower, a Kryn soldier dropped without a sound. The other guards did not notice immediately. By the time they started to react, Wright had already eliminated 2 more. Grant triggered her charges. The explosion was sharp and precise, blowing the door inward in a shower of sparks. Mitchell moved first, his heavy plasma gun roaring as he laid down covering fire. Green bolts of superheated gas tore through the entrance, forcing the Kryn quick reaction force to take cover. Baker and Cole rushed in right behind him, their rifles adding to the storm of fire. The Kryn soldiers inside were bigger than humans, standing almost 7 feet tall in their armor. They carried plasma rifles and wore heavy chest plates, but size and armor did not matter as much as training and tactics. The Kryn had spent decades fighting species that were weaker than them. They were used to winning through intimidation and overwhelming force. They had never fought anyone like humans. Baker moved through the building like water flowing downhill, always taking the path of least resistance. She used doorways for cover, fired from unexpected angles, and never stayed in one place for more than a few seconds. The Kryn tried to track her and found themselves shooting at empty space while bullets came from somewhere else entirely. Grant tossed a flashbang grenade around a corner, and the resulting explosion of light and sound left 3 Kryn soldiers stunned and helpless. Mitchell held the entrance, his plasma gun cutting down any Kryn who tried to reinforce their comrades inside. The weapon was heavy enough that most humans would struggle to carry it, but Mitchell had trained with weights since he was a teenager. He braced it against his shoulder and fired in controlled bursts, conserving ammunition while maintaining constant pressure. Outside, Wright continued to pick off targets, his shots coming at irregular intervals that kept the enemy nervous and confused. The fighting moved deeper into the building. Baker kicked open a door and found herself in what looked like a detention area. Cages lined the walls, filled with Velan prisoners. They stared at her with wide, terrified eyes. Their skin was pale blue and almost transparent, showing the blood vessels underneath. They were small and fragile-looking, nothing like the armored Kryn soldiers. Baker felt a surge of protective anger. These people had done nothing to deserve this. "Cole, get these cages open," Baker ordered. She and Grant provided cover while Cole worked on the electronic locks. The Velans huddled together, confused and afraid. One of them, an elder with white hair, spoke in broken English. "You are human," he said, his voice full of wonder. "You came." Baker nodded. "We came." "Now we are getting you out of here. Can you walk?" The elder nodded. They could walk? That was good because carrying them would be difficult under fire. Up in space, Morrison was running out of tricks. The Valiant had disabled or destroyed 7 Kryn ships, but the remaining 5 had finally gotten organized. They had formed a defensive sphere and were coordinating their fire. Morrison's shields were down to 15%. Hull breaches on 3 decks. One of the main railguns was offline, and the missile tubes were nearly empty. His crew was exhausted, running on adrenaline and training. Harris studied his tactical display, looking for any advantage they could exploit. "Captain," he said, "if we can take out their command ship, the others might lose coordination. It is a risky shot, though. We would have to get close, and their flagship has the heaviest armor." Morrison considered it. They were already committed. "Might as well go all the way." "Do it," he said. Harris plotted the course. The Valiant accelerated directly toward Vex's flagship, ignoring the other ships. The Kryn commander saw them coming and laughed. The foolish human was finally breaking. His ship would be torn apart before it got close enough to matter. Vex ordered his gunners to concentrate all fire on the approaching vessel. Energy beams and missiles filled space, all converging on the Valiant. Morrison flew through the incoming fire with skills honed in the asteroid fields of Sol system. He had learned to navigate by instinct, making split-second decisions that his conscious mind could not process fast enough. A missile passed so close that its engine wash scorched the hull. An energy beam clipped the port nacelle, vaporizing armor plating. But the Valiant kept coming, damaged but not defeated. At the last possible second, Morrison pulled up sharply, bringing the Valiant into a position directly above the flagship's bridge. Harris fired the remaining railgun, emptying the entire magazine in one continuous burst. The metal slugs hammered into the command section of the Kryn ship. Armor crumpled. The bridge exploded into space. Vex had just enough time to realize his mistake before everything went dark. The other Kryn ships hesitated. Their commander was dead. Their formation was broken. They had lost more than half their fleet to a single human vessel. This was not supposed to be possible. The Kryn prided themselves on their military might, but they were learning a hard lesson. Might was not just about size and numbers. It was about skill, determination, and the willingness to take risks that others considered suicidal. On the surface, Baker led the rescued Valens through the streets toward Dr. Peterson's field hospital. Mitchell and Grant covered their retreat, while Wright continued to snipe from his elevated position. The Kryn were confused and disorganized, their command structure disrupted. They fired wildly, hitting their own soldiers as often as they hit rubble and empty air. Peterson had set up his hospital in an intact building with good sight lines and multiple exits. When he saw Baker coming with the prisoners, he immediately started organizing triage. Some of the Valens were injured, others were sick from poor conditions in the Kryn cages. Peterson moved among them with calm efficiency, his hands gentle despite their size. He had trained for years to treat multiple species, learning the subtle differences in their biology. The Valen elder watched in amazement as this human doctor treated his people with such care. He had heard stories about humans, about their violence and their dangerous world, but this man was kind, his touch careful and precise. The elder began to understand something important. Humans could fight like warriors when necessary, but they chose to be healers when possible. That combination was rare in the galaxy. Morrison's voice came over Baker's radio. "Sergeant, the enemy fleet is broken. We are finishing them off now. How is it down there?" Baker looked around at the freed prisoners, at her squad still in fighting positions, at the Kryn soldiers retreating in disarray. "We have secured the area, Captain," she reported. "The Valens are safe." Morrison allowed himself a small smile. "Good work, Sergeant. Let them know the cavalry arrived, even if we are a bit short on horses." The remaining Kryn ships tried to regroup, but their coordination was gone. Without Commander Vex directing them, each captain made their own decisions. Some wanted to keep fighting, others wanted to retreat. A few tried to negotiate. This confusion was exactly what Morrison needed. He pressed his advantage, hunting the scattered vessels one by one. The Valiant was barely holding together. Sparks flew from damaged consoles. The air tasted like smoke and burnt plastic. 3 crew members were injured and had been taken to the medical bay. The ship's computer kept announcing new hull breaches and system failures. But Morrison and his crew kept fighting because the job was not done yet. There were still Kryn ships in orbit, and as long as they remained, the Velans were in danger. Harris managed to knock out the engines on 2 more Kryn vessels. They tumbled through space, unable to maneuver or fight back. Morrison left them alive but helpless. He was not interested in unnecessary killing. His goal was to protect the Velans, not to wipe out the Kryn. One of the enemy cruisers tried to make a run for it, jumping to quantum drive. Morrison let it go. Fear could be a powerful message. That left 2 Kryn ships still combat capable. They hung back uncertain. Their commanders knew they could not win. The human vessel had just destroyed 7 ships and crippled 3 more. Logic said they should retreat immediately. But Kryn culture valued aggression and dominance. Running from a single enemy ship would bring shame to their families and clans. They were trapped between pride and survival. Morrison opened a communication channel to both ships. "This is Captain Morrison. I am offering you one chance to surrender. Withdraw all your forces from Vela Prime. Release all prisoners. Leave this system and do not come back. If you do this, I will let you live. If you refuse, I will destroy both of your ships. You have 60 seconds to decide." The Kryn captains conferred with each other. Morrison watched his countdown timer tick away the seconds. He hoped they would be smart. Enough blood had been spilled today, but he was also prepared to follow through on his threat if necessary. 40 seconds passed, then 50. At 58 seconds, one of the Kryn ships transmitted its acceptance. 3 seconds later, the other ship did the same. Hughes relayed the surrender terms. All Kryn ground forces would return to their transports immediately. All prisoners would be released. All stolen property would be returned. The Kryn fleet would leave the system within 6 hours and would not return for any reason. Morrison added one more condition. The Kryn would provide medical supplies and equipment to help repair the damage they had caused. The enemy captains agreed to everything. They had no choice. On the surface, Baker received word of the surrender. She immediately ordered her squad to secure the landing zones where Kryn transports would pick up their troops. Mitchell and Wright took positions covering the main assembly area. Grant set up cameras to record everything, making sure the Kryn kept their word. Cole monitored communications, ready to call for support if needed. The Kryn soldiers emerged from their positions in small groups, their weapons lowered. They looked shocked and defeated. Many were injured. Some had to be carried by their comrades. They filed onto the transports in silence, avoiding eye contact with the human Marines. These soldiers had thought they were invincible. One day of fighting humans had taught them otherwise. More Velan prisoners were released from various holding areas throughout the city. They came out blinking in the sunlight, weak and frightened but alive. Peterson and his medical team worked tirelessly to treat them all. The doctor had not slept in 20 hours, but he kept moving from patient to patient, his hands steady and his voice calm. Other crew members from the Valiant came down to help, bringing supplies and equipment. The Velan elder, whose name was Toril, approached Morrison after the captain came down to the surface. Toril was old, his transparent skin showing veins like blue rivers beneath the surface. He moved slowly, using a cane to support himself. But his eyes were bright and alert. "Captain Morrison," he said in careful English, "I must ask you a question." Morrison nodded for him to continue. "Why did you come?" Toril asked. "My people sent a distress signal, yes, but we did not truly expect help. The Galactic Council has ignored us for years. We have no military to offer in return. We have no valuable resources to trade. You owed us nothing, yet you came with 1 ship against 12. You risked everything for strangers. Why?" Morrison looked at the ruined city, at the injured Velans being treated by his medical team, at his own crew working to distribute food and water. He thought about Earth and all the harsh lessons it had taught humanity. The question deserved an honest answer. "Elder Toril, humans learned something important during our evolution. The universe is not kind. Life is hard, and sometimes it is not fair. We could have become bitter and cruel. We could have decided that since we suffered, everyone else should suffer too. But we chose a different path," Morrison continued. "We decided that strength should protect the weak, not prey on them. We learned that civilization is not about how well you do when things are easy. It is about what you do when things are hard. Your people asked for help. We had the ability to provide it. That made it our responsibility to try. It is really that simple. Toril was quiet for a long moment. Then tears began to roll down his face, which surprised Morrison, because he had not known that Velens could cry. The elder reached out and took Morrison's hand in both of his own. His grip was weak, but his emotion was strong. "Thank you," he said. "Thank you for showing us that there is still goodness in the galaxy. We had almost forgotten." The withdrawal took the full 6 hours. Kryn transports shuttled back and forth between the surface and their surviving ships. Baker's Marines watched every movement, making sure no weapons or prisoners were smuggled out. When the last transport lifted off, a cheer went up from the gathered Velens. Children who had hidden during the occupation came out into the streets. Families reunited. The nightmare was over. Morrison returned to the Valiant to oversee repairs. The ship was a mess. The engineering team estimated it would take weeks to fix all the damage. Some of it would have to wait until they could reach a proper shipyard, but the most critical systems were already being patched. Life support was stable. Engines were functional at 60%. Weapons were being reloaded. The Valiant had taken a beating, but she was still flying. Hughes brought him reports from Earth Command. The news of the Battle of Vela Prime was spreading fast. 16 different species had already contacted Earth asking for defense treaties. The Galactic Council had issued a formal statement praising humanity's actions. Even more surprising, 3 former Kryn colonies had declared independence, inspired by the Velens' survival. The political landscape was changing. Harris approached Morrison on the bridge. "Captain, you realize what we have started," he said quietly. "The galaxy is going to see us differently now. Some will want to be our friends. Others will be afraid of us. A few might even try to challenge us to prove they are stronger." Morrison nodded. He had thought about all of that during the battle. "Yes, I know. But what was the alternative? Let the Velens die because we were worried about political consequences? That is not who we are," Harris smiled. "I am not arguing, Captain. I am just saying we should be prepared for what comes next." Morrison looked around the damaged bridge at his tired but proud crew. They had done something remarkable today. 1 ship against a fleet, 52 people against thousands. The odds had been impossible, but they had won anyway. That was the human way. When someone needed help, you gave it. When the fight seemed hopeless, you fought harder. Down on Vela Prime, Baker and her Marines helped clear rubble and search for survivors. They found Velens hiding in basements and collapsed buildings. Each rescue brought more tears and more gratitude. Wright, the quiet sniper, ended up carrying a Velan child on his shoulders through the streets. The child laughed for the first time in days. Grant showed some Velan teenagers how to safely dispose of unexploded ordnance. Mitchell shared his rations with a family who had lost everything. These small moments mattered as much as the battle itself. The Velens were learning that humans were not just dangerous. They were also kind. They could fight like demons when needed, but they chose to be gentle when possible. It was a strange combination, and it confused many species in the galaxy. But to humans, it made perfect sense. Strength without compassion was just cruelty. Compassion without strength was helpless. You needed both. 3 weeks later, the Valiant limped back into Earth orbit. The ship looked like it had been through a war, which it had. Scorch marks covered the hull. Entire sections were sealed off due to damage. One of the main engines was barely functioning, but the crew was alive and proud. They had done what seemed impossible and saved an entire species from extinction. A fleet of repair ships met them, along with a delegation from Earth Command. Morrison and his senior officers were summoned to a debriefing that lasted 3 days. They had to explain every decision, every tactic, every casualty. The admirals asked hard questions. Why had Morrison engaged without waiting for reinforcements? How had he justified risking his crew on such long odds? What would he have done if the Kryn had called for their own backup? Morrison answered honestly. He had known the risks. He had understood that waiting for backup would mean more Velan deaths. He had gambled that his crew's training and the Valiant's capabilities would be enough. It had been a close thing, closer than he wanted to admit, but it had worked. The Velens were free, and the Kryn had learned to respect human determination. The admirals deliberated for hours. Some thought Morrison should be court-martialed for recklessness. Others argued he should be promoted for initiative and courage. In the end, they settled on something in between. Morrison would keep his rank and his command. but he would have to attend additional command training. It was a slap on the wrist that everyone knew was mostly symbolic. The real verdict came from public opinion. News of the Battle of Vela Prime had spread throughout human space and beyond. Morrison and his crew became celebrities overnight. Children wore Valiant patches on their jackets. Songs were written about the battle. Artists painted dramatic scenes of the engagement. But Morrison felt uncomfortable with all the attention. They had just done their jobs, nothing more. The real heroes were the Velans who had survived and were now rebuilding their world. Baker and her Marines received commendations for their actions on the surface. Wright was promoted to corporal. Grant was awarded a medal for her demolition work. Mitchell became an instructor at the Marine Combat School. Cole was offered a position in special operations. They all declined the more comfortable assignments and requested to stay with the Valiant. They were a team, and teams stayed together. Dr. Peterson received recognition from the Galactic Medical Association, a rare honor for a human. His treatment of both Valen and Kryn wounded had impressed observers from dozens of species. Several alien governments requested that Peterson train their own medical staff in human techniques. He agreed to write a manual but insisted on staying with the Valiant. His place was with the crew. Harris was offered his own command, a brand new cruiser with the latest technology. He turned it down. Captain Morrison needs a good tactical officer, he said simply. Besides, the Valiant has been lucky for us so far. Why change? The truth was that the crew had become family during their years together. They trusted each other completely, and that trust had saved their lives at Vela Prime. While the Valiant underwent repairs, Morrison visited the Velan embassy on Earth. Elder Toril had traveled all this way to personally thank humanity for their help. The old Velan looked healthier than he had on Vela Prime, though he still moved slowly. He and Morrison sat in a garden overlooking the Pacific Ocean, drinking tea and talking about the future. My people want to establish a formal alliance with humanity, Toril said. We have little to offer militarily, but we are scholars and artists. We can share our knowledge. We can help humanity understand other species and cultures. We can be friends if you will have us. Morrison smiled. Elder Toril, you do not need to offer us anything. Friends do not keep score. But yes, we would be honored to have Vela Prime as an ally. The political effects of the battle continued to ripple outward. The Kryn Empire was in chaos. Commander Vex had been their rising star, and his death had created a power vacuum. 3 different generals claimed leadership, and the Empire was tearing itself apart in civil conflict. Former colonies saw their chance and declared independence. The great conquering force that had terrorized the galaxy for decades was collapsing from within. Other aggressive species took note. If the Kryn could be defeated, then no empire was invincible. Several border conflicts that had been simmering for years suddenly cooled as potential aggressors reconsidered their plans. The Galactic Council found itself with more authority than it had enjoyed in decades. Species that had ignored council resolutions now paid attention. Nobody wanted to be the next ones to face human intervention. But not everyone was happy with the new status quo. Some species worried that humans would become the new dominant power, replacing one empire with another. They pointed to Earth's violent history as evidence that humans could not be trusted with too much power. Others argued that humanity had proven itself different, that they fought only to protect, not to conquer. The debate raged in every council chamber and media outlet across the galaxy. Morrison tried to ignore the politics and focus on his crew. The Valiant's repairs were finally complete, better than new in some ways. The ship had been upgraded with improved shields and more efficient engines. New crew members arrived to replace those who had transferred or retired. Morrison made sure to personally welcome each one, explaining the ship's culture and expectations. The Valiant was not the biggest or newest ship in the fleet, but it had heart. On their first day back on patrol, Hughes picked up another distress signal. This one came from a mining colony on the edge of human space. Pirates had attacked and taken hostages. The local security forces were outgunned and asking for help. Morrison looked at his crew. They looked back at him with determination. This was what they did. This was why they were out here. Set course for the colony, Morrison ordered. Maximum speed. Harris began plotting attack vectors. Baker assembled her Marines. Peterson prepared the medical bay. The Valiant's engines flared to life and they jumped into quantum drive. It felt good to be back in action, Morrison thought. The paperwork and ceremonies had been necessary, But this was what he had signed up for. Protecting people, making a difference. As they traveled through quantum space, Morrison stood at the observation window looking at the swirling colors of faster-than-light travel. He thought about Earth, that beautiful blue world that had tried so hard to kill humanity and failed. It had made them tough and adaptable, but more importantly, it had taught them the value of cooperation and compassion. Those lessons had served humanity well. Harris joined him at the window. Thinking about Vela Prime, the tactical officer asked. Morrison nodded. I keep wondering if we did the right thing. We saved a lot of lives, but we also changed the political landscape. Some species are afraid of us now. Harris was quiet for a moment. Captain, he said, fear and respect often look similar. The important thing is what we do with that respect. As long as we use our strength to protect rather than dominate, we will be fine. Morrison hoped Harris was right. Humanity had a long history of making mistakes, of letting power corrupt. But they also had a history of learning from those mistakes and trying to be better. The galaxy was watching to see which version of humanity would emerge as a major power. Morrison was determined to show them the best version, the one that valued life and fought for justice. The Valiant dropped out of quantum drive near the mining colony. Sensors immediately detected 3 pirate ships in orbit. They were smaller than the Kryn warships, but still dangerous. Morrison studied the tactical display and smiled. After facing down the Kryn Empire, a few pirates seemed almost easy. Almost, he never underestimated an opponent. That was how people got killed. Red alert, Morrison ordered. All hands to battle stations. The crew moved with practiced efficiency. They had done this before and would do it again. This was their purpose. When someone called for help, humans answered. When innocents were threatened, humans stood between them and danger. It was not about glory or recognition. It was about doing what was right because it needed to be done. The pirates hailed the Valiant, probably expecting to intimidate the newcomer. Instead, they found themselves facing the ship that had defeated the Kryn Empire. Morrison saw the recognition dawn on their faces as they realized who they were dealing with. The pirate leader opened his mouth to speak, then closed it again. His ships began powering down their weapons. Smart choice, Morrison thought. The Deathworlders had arrived and resistance was futile.